You buy 100 shares, watch the ticker go green. Congratulations, you now own a sliver of the most valuable company on Earth. Feels like winning, doesn't it? Except the thing you actually bought isn't a chip maker. It's a toll booth sitting in front of the entire artificial intelligence industry, and the toll booth operator doesn't own the road, doesn't own the cars, doesn't even own the factory that builds the booth itself. Somehow that's the safest place to stand. Here's the paradox: nobody puts on the thumbnail. A company that manufactures nothing, that doesn't run a single fabrication plant anywhere on the planet, is posting gross margins that would make a software company jealous while selling physical steel and silicon. Dell sells hardware at 20% margins. Nvidia sells hardware at margins north of 70. That's not a chip business. That's something else wearing a chip business as a disguise. Stick around, because by the time this is over, you'll understand why the smartest CEOs on the planet are begging on waiting lists for permission to hand this company their money. Owning a piece of this machine happens in 3 very different rooms, and almost nobody in the first room understands what's happening in the third. Room 1. You, on an app, on your phone. A few $100s, maybe a few thousand if you're feeling brave. You own a fraction of a share. You get a line on a portfolio screen that moves when Jensen Huang gives a keynote. You have precisely zero influence over anything the company does, and you're competing for attention with every other retail trader on the planet who watched the same video you did. Room 2. Institutional capital, pension funds, hedge funds, mutual funds, building positions worth 8 and 9 figures. These are the people on the earnings calls asking pointed questions about gross margin guidance and export restrictions. They move markets when they buy or sell in size, but even they don't control the one thing that actually matters in this business, which is supply. A fund manager holding $500 million in stock still can't call up and get their chip order moved up the queue. Room 3 is where the real ownership happens, and it isn't ownership of stock at all. It's Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, and increasingly entire governments spending tens of billions of dollars a year not on shares but on the hardware itself, negotiating allocation directly, sometimes flying executives to Taiwan to check on production capacity in person. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are treating chip access as a diplomatic priority, the same way oil-poor nations once treated pipeline access, and the United States government has gone the other direction entirely, restricting the most advanced versions of these chips from export to China altogether, turning a purchase order into a matter of national security. This is the tier where owning a piece of the AI economy actually means something, and the price of entry isn't a few $100s. It's a standing order measured in the billions, renewed every year, with no guarantee of getting everything you asked for, and, increasingly, with a government somewhere in the loop deciding whether the order can even be filled. Strip away the stock chart, and the actual product is embarrassingly simple to describe and almost impossible to replicate. A regular processor is one extremely capable worker doing one task at a time, brilliantly in sequence. The chip Nvidia builds is different. It's 10,000 identical, less sophisticated workers, all doing simple arithmetic at the exact same instant on different pieces of the same enormous problem. For rendering a video game frame, that's useful. For training an artificial intelligence model, which is fundamentally just staggering amounts of repeated matrix multiplication, it turns out to be exactly, precisely, almost suspiciously, the right tool for the job. Nobody planned that convergence in 1999, it happened by accident, and the accident is now worth trillions. Here's the insider vocabulary that actually explains the markup. The physical chip is manufactured using something called CoWoS packaging, chip on wafer on substrate, a process that stacks the processing core directly next to high bandwidth memory on a single dense interposer. It's brutally difficult to manufacture at scale. There's exactly one company in the world doing it at the volume required. And that bottleneck alone is why waiting lists stretch past a year. Then there's wafer allocation, the actual queue position a company gets at the one facility capable of producing these chips, which functions less like a purchase order and more like a favor being called in. Now, the counterintuitive fact, the one that should genuinely unsettle you. The raw manufacturing cost of the company's flagship data center chip sits somewhere in the low thousands of dollars. The price customers pay is routinely 10 times that, sometimes more, and they pay it without negotiating because the actual product being sold was never the silicon. It's the software sitting on top of it, a programming platform built over 2 decades that every AI researcher, every university, every open source framework on Earth has already learned to speak fluently. That platform started as a cost center nobody could justify. For roughly 6 years, it generated almost no revenue while consuming engineering budget and transistor space that could have gone toward the gaming chips actually paying the bills. Then a research team trained an image recognition model on 2 of the company's consumer graphics cards and beat the field so decisively that the entire academic world noticed in the same week. Every lab that read the paper and tried to replicate it reached for the same hardware because the code was already written for it. That single event is the reason switching away from this platform today isn't a hardware decision. It's asking your entire engineering team to become fluent in a second language on a deadline while your competitors keep shipping in the first one, and it's asking every university computer science department that already teaches in this language to retrain a generation of graduates. Walk into one of these data centers and the story stops being about chips and starts being about something far less glamorous: concrete, copper, and electricity. A single cluster of these processors can pull more power than a small city, and the physical layout of the entire facility exists purely to solve one unglamorous problem: get heat out fast enough that 10,000 chips running at full tilt don't melt themselves into scrap. This is the hidden liability nobody mentions in the earnings call. Companies aren't actually bidding against each other for chips anymore. They're bidding for scarce megawatts, for available packaging capacity at one facility in Taiwan, for cooling infrastructure that takes years to permit and build. The chip is the visible part of the iceberg. Underneath it sits a physical supply chain, so constrained that even a company with unlimited cash can't simply buy its way to the front of the line. You can write a check for 100,000 chips tomorrow morning. You cannot write a check that makes the packaging facility produce them any faster. There's a second invisible cost buried in that same iceberg, and it's the wiring between the chips, not the chips themselves. Thousands of these processors have to talk to each other constantly during training, synchronizing calculations dozens of times a second. If the network connecting them is even slightly slow, the entire cluster idles, waiting, burning money while doing nothing. That's why this company spent nearly $7 billion acquiring a networking hardware business years ago that most analysts dismissed as overpriced. Today, that division alone generates tens of billions in annual revenue, and it does something more valuable than the revenue itself. It means a customer can't simply swap the processor for a cheaper one without also ripping out and rebuilding the entire network fabric connecting every machine in the building. That gap between money and physical capacity is where the real power in this business actually lives, and it's invisible on every stock chart. Underneath the margin story sits a fault line the company can't paper over forever. The biggest customers writing the biggest checks are also the companies with the most obvious incentive to stop needing to write them. Every major cloud provider is quietly funding its own internal chip design team, not because the alternative outperforms what they're currently buying, but because paying monopoly pricing to a single supplier forever is not a position any company that size wants to be permanently locked into. History offers 2 blunt warnings about exactly how badly this kind of dominance can unravel, and they didn't happen the same way. The first is a story of overreach. A rival graphics chip company once dominated the exact same gaming market Nvidia started in, and rather than staying focused on the chip, it decided to vertically integrate, buying up a board manufacturer and taking on debt to control every layer of its own supply chain. The strategy assumed demand would keep climbing fast enough to service the debt. It didn't. The company collapsed into bankruptcy within 2 years, and its assets were picked up for parts by the very competitor it had been trying to outmaneuver. Overextending the balance sheet to chase control instead of staying lean and staying fast is precisely what killed it. The second is a story of misjudging the room. A far larger, far older chip company, the one that effectively invented the modern processor business, had chances to own the future more than once and passed. It turned down the opportunity to build the chip inside the original smartphone because the margins looked too thin to bother with. It spent years building processors optimized for doing one task very well instead of investing early in massively parallel architectures. And by the time it recognized where computing was actually heading, an entirely different company already owned the software ecosystem, the developer trust, and the manufacturing relationships needed to catch up. Being the incumbent didn't save it. Reading the room wrong did the damage slowly, one product cycle at a time. Reduce the entire business down to one sentence and it looks like this. Scarcity in physical manufacturing multiplied by a software lock-in nobody wants to rebuild, multiplied by demand from an industry that hasn't yet figured out if its spending will ever pay for itself equals pricing power that looks, on paper, like it shouldn't be legal. Net margins land somewhere in the mid-50s, real profit, not just gross, on hardware, which simply does not happen anywhere else in this industry. Study the man who built it, and the pattern looks less like luck and more like discipline nobody else was willing to sustain. Jensen Huang funded a general-purpose software platform for 6 straight years with almost no revenue attached to it, while his own board questioned the spending because he was betting on customers who didn't exist yet. That bet is the entire empire now. And here's the punchline nobody puts in the earnings deck. This business isn't rigged against the amateur because the amateur was never invited to the table in the first place. It's rigged in favor of whoever controls the choke point everyone else has to pass through to build anything at all. The gold rush makes headlines. The company selling the only shovel that fits the ground quietly cashes every check, whether the gold shows up or not.